Welcome back to another episode of CCW Insider, where we talk about the matches and stories of wrestling's last territory, Coastal Championship Wrestling. My name is Ryan Joy, and I run MinutesToBellTime.com, a website and database tracking pro wrestling from around the world. On today's show, I am talking with the voice of CCW, Mr. Blake Chadwick, and Blake has a fascinating perspective on both the business and on CCW. I can't wait for you to hear it. I'm not going to delay any longer. Here's my interview with Mr. Blake Chadwick. I am talking with the voice of Coastal Championship Wrestling, Mr. Blake Chadwick. Blake, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you on as the voice of CCW. It's great.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. It's been a pleasure watching these each and every week on the CCW YouTube channel. You're doing a great job with them. And when I got the call to be on this week, I ran right to it. I'm very excited.
Well, let's not waste any time here. What I want to know right off the bat is, how did you get involved with CCW?
So, interestingly enough, I've been in the professional wrestling business. We're coming up on 18 years, actually, in a few weeks. But it was back in, I believe, 2007, I reached out to CCW for the first time. I was actually at a TNA house show down in Miami, in Coral Gables, the University of Miami, one of the first TNA house shows at the time. I think the main event was Booker T and Samoa Joe. And I went out to my car, and there was a flyer on it advertising an upcoming local wrestling event with one half of Phi Delta Slam, I think it was Bruno, taking on Dustin Rhodes in a cage match. And I said to myself, at this point, I had been involved in the business for a couple of years, primarily in the state of Virginia. I was looking to cut my teeth in South Florida, expand my horizons a bit. This has always been a hotbed. And of course, the WWE was, kind of putting their footprint down here in the Orlando area. So it was really good timing with everything. And I reached out to the phone number, and who else answered the phone but Mr. Dan Evans, who's now my broadcast colleague. And I basically said, hey, this is who I am. I've been around for a few years. I would love to be able to ring announce or do some commentary on your shows. How can I get involved? And Dan pretty much gave me I'm the announcer, so we don't really have any spots, but come on down, check it out, blah, 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 blah. Me at 21 years old saying, oh, what the hell is he talking about? I'm better than that. I don't need to just come down and check it out. But it inevitably delayed my entry into CCW. I probably should have just gone down there to Coral Springs that day, but I decided not to. But nonetheless, about, it was maybe 15 months ago or so, I was in conversation with everyone's favorite scumbag, Lou Spector. And Lou was basically saying, we want to get you into CCW, been trying for years. And it was almost that white whale. Because I had worked everywhere in South Florida. I had pretty much worked all throughout the state of Florida. There was not many promotions that I hadn't at least touched once or twice, except for Coastal Championship Wrestling. It was always the one that got away. And I actually had a similar situation with the NWA for many years as well, until I finally got to call an NWA World title match. But that's another story maybe for later on. But it was one of these situations where I'd been kind of knocking at the door, wanting to get in, but with Dan doing the ring announcing and the commentary, there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to get involved. And, I was heavily involved at the time with GWA and Gangrel and the whole Gangrel's Wrestling Asylum. And, things were kind of changing there, kind of going in a different direction. And I didn't necessarily see myself there long term. And I was kind of looking to make a new home in South Florida. In conversation with Lou, he kind of said, hey, let me put you over and, talk to the higher ups. At the time, I didn't even know Nelio. And, one thing led to another. And, late April of 2021, I walked in that very school you're in right now and, spoke to everyone. And I guess you say the rest is history.
Did you say 18 years you've been in the wrestling business?
I have been in the business for 18 years. I've officially half my life now.
Wow. So has it all been commentary and ring announcing, or was there something else that you did early on? Or
I've had some sprinkling in there of some hosting, some backstage interviewing, things like that. It seems like typically at the announcer broadcaster level in professional wrestling, you generally start out as a ring announcer and then, try to fan out and spread your wings from there. When I broke in back in 2004, there wasn't really a YouTube. There wasn't really a means to broadcast shows. A lot of companies did not necessarily even record their shows. If they did, they typically went to DVD. A lot of people listening are probably like, what's a DVD even? So it's one of those situations where there just wasn't the opportunity to really get things done, how they are done today. There wasn't as many opportunities, to cut my teeth. And I started out ring announcing, and the entire time I'd always wanted to do commentary, but I was just kind of waiting my time, looking for that opportunity, finding a spot. And it actually took a little over 5 years to finally get that commentary spot. A lot of it, again, politically, someone's in a spot, they're not going to give it up, especially if someone comes in that they might think could do the job. So it's one of those situations where it took a while to finally break through. Unfortunately, fortunately, however you want to look at it, I didn't really dedicate a lot of my time when I was in college, because I started college in 2004. So right before I actually went away and came down here to FAU, up in the state of Virginia, I had started doing some ring announcing. And unfortunately, I didn't really stick with it super hard throughout college. I did some shows here and there, but I didn't do it full time. I didn't really try to get involved too much in South Florida. I was doing some sports commentary for FAU, just still trying to figure life out in a sense at, 20, 21 years old. And yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where it took a little while to finally get to the spot that I wanted to be in. But eventually, in 2009, I finally got a shot doing some commentary, and, it's been kind of a roller coaster ever since.
So you mentioned that you were doing some commentary for other sports, and you went to college. Is your professional background in commentary and broadcasting?
So I do have a degree in communications. I have done broadcast journalism, sports commentary for multitude of sports at the collegiate or high school, collegiate, and professional level: baseball, basketball, football, soccer, pretty much everything, softball. Covering all the bases there. Wrestling to me has always been that dream that I've been trying to follow, but, especially at a younger age and at a different time, it was a little bit more difficult to break into the wrestling business, and there wasn't as much direction and ability to, kind of get involved. So I always knew that, I'd love to be at the WWE, or at the time, WCW, Impact Wrestling, whatever it might be. I want to be at that level. But, I realized that I'm going to have to do some other things to be able to potentially get myself there besides just wrestling.
It's so interesting when I think about the differences between, the basketball and football and soccer and baseball and professional wrestling. I wondered if you could talk about the difference from an announcing perspective, like what mindset and that you have to be in when you approach pro wrestling as opposed to some of those other sports.
That's a great question there, Ryan. And, if you listen to me call wrestling, that I do traditionally call it like a sport. There's certainly a little bit of a difference when it comes to sports. Obviously, stats are a little bit more a thing. It's a little more statistically based and things like that. When I'm calling a wrestling match, and this is something that I discuss. I have a student now, actually, which is pretty cool. I've got an announcing student, and I tell this to the wrestling students as well, or pretty much anyone involved, because it can apply to non-announcers. What is the business of what I'm doing right now? What is the business of this match? What is the business of this segment? Obviously, listen, it's 2022. The curtain's peeled back. Pretty much most people are in on the act. They don't necessarily know how it goes from point A to point B, but they have an idea of how wrestling's constructed. And, my job is, hey, what are we trying to accomplish here? So that's what I'm going out to do. A lot of when I do sports, it's when I'm seeing and I'm reacting to it. With wrestling, there's more of the ability to dictate. There's more of the ability to kind of narrate, hey, this is the direction we're going to go. And I have the ability to kind of push you that way. So to me, it's kind of an approach on a show-by-show basis, on a match-by-match basis. What are we doing right here, right now? What is my job? If they're going in there, there's no real story. There's no real angle. We're kind of just going to have two guys. Maybe it's too technically. Like, if there's no title on the line and Alan S2S Martinez is going in there with the Florida man TC Reed, and they've got 15 minutes and they're doing a technical classic, I'm probably going to call the moves. I'm going to be calling the holds and the reversals and getting a little bit more deeper into that psychology. But if we're talking about a title match, maybe these two have been at each other's throats for a few months. There's a little bit more to play with, a little bit more to work with in terms of a story. But again, it's just kind of a case-by-case basis. And that to me is why I love wrestling, because it really is a different avenue each and every match.
Yeah, for sure. And so I want to back up a little bit. You've got 18 years in as part of the business. What about before that? What was your fandom like as a kid? Were you always a wrestling fan?
I'm what you would call a lifer from day
Okay.
one, literally out of the hospital. And when I say that, there's not really much hyperbole. Literally, a couple days out of the hospital, my parents at the time had a woman helping them transition me into the home for a couple of weeks, just kind of assisting with some things. Mrs. Green was her name. Mrs. Green would sit there and we'd be watching NWA. I mean, she would be sitting there with me a week or two old watching NWA. I actually, at 2.5 years old, was at Starrcade 88.
Oh, that's
So,
awesome.
yeah. So, I mean, this is something, I mean, it's flowing through the blood. My parents were not in the business, but in a way, it feels like it's a part of me. And it's something where, even before I liked sports, even before I could probably even like Ninja Turtles, I liked pro wrestling. I mean, that was really my first love. And, being in the heart of the NWA territory, I grew up, born and raised in Norfolk, Virginia. That's right there in the heart of the Mid-Atlantic. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the Scope, famously, of course, with the Raw Nitro DX situation back in '98. And of course, several World War III pay-per-views in addition to others. It was 5 minutes from my house. So, WCW, NWA would come to town at the time every 3 weeks, even every month. It was pretty regular where WWF would come in, once, twice a year. I would obviously watch it on weekends and syndication. But, WCW, NWA, I mean, that was my thing for many, many years. And, being in that area, it was really kind of a part of me. So for 36 years almost, I mean, wrestling's kind of been my thing. So when, I got involved 18 years ago, to me, that was always kind of a path that I was going to take.
When I tell stories on a podcast or something, I often, I think about the late 80s as a time where I really kind of got indoctrinated into wrestling as well. And I'm always trying to figure out how can I make this story from the late 80s relate to, what's going on in the business right now and what's happening on a show, in the current show. Is that something that you dabble in at all when it comes to like commentary or like referential treatment to things?
Mentally, yes. And earlier in my career, yes. Something that has been very difficult to kind of transition to, and this is peeling the curtain back a little bit here. I want to do this at the highest level. And to do it at the highest level, that means the WWE, that means AEW, that means, the best of the best. And they do things, WWE specifically, they do things slightly differently than everyone else. So a little while ago, I kind of changed the way that I approached my commentary because I didn't want to continue to display habits that would not help me get to the next level. And this day and age, as a wrestling announcer, wrestling commentator, as someone who has been in the business a long time, that's not necessarily helpful for me. They look for new blood. They look for people coming from outside realms, outside avenues, not someone who's a quote unquote lifer. People like me don't really get a lot of opportunities, this day and age. So when I'm working, I'm trying to do it in a fashion that I can weave things in. I can utilize things that still I think are important that might not necessarily be utilized at that level. But I also don't want to get myself in habits that I'm doing things that are going to make myself, them deter from wanting to bring me on board. So it's kind of a fine line. It's a tough balancing act at times. But, I went through some experiences late last year into the beginning of this year that kind of opened my eyes to really what is necessary to get to the next level. And I just want to continue to cultivate that type of style, I guess, to try to make sure that, what I'm doing, day in and day out is what they're looking for.
Hey, it's Ryan Joy back again. I hope you're enjoying this fascinating conversation that I'm having with Blake Chadwick, the voice of CCW. Now, in the second part of our interview, I'm going to be asking Blake about some of the favorite matches that he's called and what he says to people that think they could do his job. So stay tuned. That's coming up right after you hear about Alive Wrestling.
Attention wrestling fans, the place to be each and every Tuesday is on the Coastal Championship Wrestling YouTube channel, where a new episode of CCW Alive Wrestling drops at 7 p.m. Witness the hard-hitting, high-flying action that is synonymous with the longest-running independent wrestling promotion in the southeastern United States. Subscribe today and don't you dare miss it.
Are there some of those matches that really stand out for you that were like really that you were really excited to call, and or that afterwards you felt like this is a match that I want everybody to hear me call?
You just hit two of them right on the head. And actually the third one, even with Brian Cage and Rich Swann, I would certainly slide that in there. CCW is so active and so busy, and I'm so blessed to be able to be a part of this company that has so much content, because in the 14 months or whatever that I've been involved with CCW, I think I've called nearly 250 matches. And that's me still missing several shows. So that shows you how much really content CCW is putting out there, unlike any other independent company. I mean, really no one is putting content out on the level of CCW, with the exception of your major companies on national TV. So with that, I'm very much, grateful for those opportunities that I've been afforded. You hit on Jacob Fatu and Gangrel, both matches in Port St. Lucie, of course, part one back in February. And then now, part two, which recently has been released on our YouTube channel, which came down at St. Lucie Showdown 2 back in April. That match right there, I mean, for my money, certainly one of the better ones of 2022, certainly one of the best in my tenure in CCW. Gangrel's a personal friend of mine. We go back about 7 years. We're very close. And seeing him over the last year or so struggle through some injuries, it's been very difficult, because he's obviously not a rookie. So he's been around a long time. And to have those kinds of injuries where potentially you have to go under the knife, then you start after thinking about your future. And I was certainly feeling for the Vampire Warrior, but he's undergone some treatments. He's certainly been rehabbing and things like that. And that match he had with Jacob in April really showed a renewed sense of life in Gangrel. And to me, you go back about 25 years, a little bit less, those late 90s, those Stone Cold Steve Austin Attitude Era main event brawls that we become accustomed to, that main event style that Stone Cold sort of cultivated. To me, you saw a blueprint of that in April with Jacob Fatu and Gangrel. They brawled all over the arena. They used every type of weapon, and it all made sense. I mean, everything was tremendous, and it was just a really, really great match. And then, Ryan, another match you had mentioned there, Marina Tucker and Kylan King, a build up to about 4 months to that cage match there. Several confrontations. Of course, Kylan winning the title back in January at Bash of the Brew. Then, of course, their interactions in Port St. Lucie and all throughout Ocala. A lot of interaction between them. Marina has been at the top of the queen of the mountain, if you will, here in CCW. The mother effing king comes in fresh off of AEW TV, ready for a collision course there. And for my money, I mean, I've called several cage matches. It's certainly in the conversation for one of the better cage matches I've called. But Ryan, when it comes to women's wrestling, I'd say the only match that I have called that even comes close to this match and would also be in the conversation, it was about 4 years ago. It was Taya Valkyrie and Penelope Ford. They did a street fight between the two of them, and they went all out. That was up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That's the only match to me on the women's side that even comes close. Marina Tucker, very bright future in this business. And for the last year or so, I called Kylan King the 2021 breakout star, not just in CCW, not just in Florida, not even just the Southeast. I think the entire United States when it comes to the women's side. She's building on that here in 2022. And to me, that division's hers to lose. So those two matches really stand out to me. And the best part about it, I mean, you're talking about, especially from the women's side, kind of two, homegrown talents in a way, as Kylan's made a home down here in CCW. Marina's been the women's champion and a cornerstone of this division for quite some time. So it's great to see this kind of talent cultivated locally here and be able to carry it out on a bigger stage. And,
the other thing is that both of these women that we're talking about have had opportunities, Kylan most recently NWA, Marina Tucker is going to be on WOW. So what that's doing is it's bringing the eyeballs right back to that match that we just talked about, that cage match. So very, very interesting and fun how they're getting pulled into those promotions, and then the eyeballs go right back to CCW.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, a match like that, a cage match in front of 500-600 screaming fans, bloodshed, it's going to go viral. People are going to see that. They're going to hear about it. And those women delivered. I mean, there was really, as from a technical standpoint, from a booker standpoint, from an office standpoint, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I had no qualms with that match. Those two women delivered it, and they left it all in the ring. And for a main event, big blow-off title match, on a big occasion like that, on a huge stage, you really can't ask for much more.
No, absolutely. You a few minutes ago, you kind of slid it in there, kind of teased it. The NWA title match. Tell me about this. Is that's a big deal, especially for you, somebody growing up in NWA territory.
Absolutely. And the coolest part was I got to do it in Winston-Salem, North Carolina on Thanksgiving weekend. Like, to me, there's
Oh,
nothing
wow.
more traditional NWA wheelhouse than that. And it was at the time as Nick Aldis, fresh off of regaining the title from Cody Rhodes back in late 2018. And he went one-on-one with Jake Hager. And it was an incredible bout there. They went about 20, 25 minutes. It lived up to the hype. I mean, from a fan perspective, I didn't necessarily think Jake Hager was winning the NWA World title. But just like any classic NWA World Heavyweight title match, they delivered, and they went out there, and there were moments in time where you thought, hey, Hager might steal this one. Hager might, walk out. He's an All-American. He has that pedigree of someone that can really be at that level. So it was really a great match to see. And, it was something I'd been chomping at the bit for years and years and years, not even working with an NWA affiliate. I mean, I was knocking on the door. I mean, just to be able to be a part of that lineage. And there's, I was with a company, Ring Warriors. I don't know if you've heard of them. They were on international TV. We also had a run for about 3 months in 2018 into 2019 on WGN. So it was on a national level. It was a pretty big company. We did our filming out in Las Vegas. NWA was affiliated at one time with the Ring Warriors. The show before I joined the company, they broke the affiliation. And there was another situation back in 2014. There was an NWA up in the Tampa area, NWA FUW, Florida Underground Wrestling. Had an opportunity to work there. Wonderful promoter, Dante Brown. Still does some managing throughout the state sometimes. Dante, great guy. I was about to work there, and then basically because this is one of those situations where, it might be a little too behind the scenes, but, it's a long time ago. And it was a situation where Ring Warriors, recently breaking their affiliation with the NWA, was a little bitter about it, didn't want their voice working with another NWA. I was young in the business at the time. I had not really gotten many big breaks other than Ring Warriors. So I decided to, not gamble, I guess, and just say, all right, fine, I won't work the show. But another situation where I was about to do something NWA related, and then I got pulled right back.
Yeah. So, when you think about all of the legendary play-by-play men, they all have their things that they say, right? JR says slobber knocker and wacky as a pet coon, and Gordon Soley says so long from the Sunshine State. Joey Styles says, oh my God. Are there any Blake Chadwick isms that we should be all listening for?
That's a great question. I'd like to think that if you listen to multiple of my matches, I mean, there's different situations where I say and do things that I've never really heard others do before in those situations where, I can kind of brand it my own. I guess from a ring announcing perspective, I do have a little bit of my, I guess, my own, main event kind of introduction that I do, that I try to brand and, infuse some different talents there. I do, like I said, I'd have different things that I say for different situations that I guess are kind of signature Blake Chadwick things. I don't necessarily have like a signature catchphrase. I mean, maybe I do and I just don't realize it, but I guess, it's something where I've always been of the thought process, and, maybe it's a little detrimental. It could be a little dated. I'm not sure. If I go out there and just do my job, I'm going to get over. I'm going to be, seen in a positive light. I'm going to get respect from my peers. People are going to want to book me. I'm going to be looked at as, as good. So I guess it's one of those things where I've never gone out of my way to try to make anything about me. But, I'm sure if you listen, you could probably say, hey, that's like a Blake branded phrase type thing. And, you're probably right. But that's just not really the mentality I have. Maybe at some point that's something that shifts a little bit, but I've gotten this far that way, so I'm probably just going to stick to my guns.
Yeah, we'll probably get, letters. These are the things that Blake says every
I hope our listeners out there pay enough attention to the matches and can brand me.
There you go. Yep. So, when I think of, I think that like a lot of wrestling fans probably look at pro wrestling commentary and they're like, I could do that. That's something that, I could
happens all the time.
do. I bet it does. And I wonder, what do you say to those people? Because here you are, somebody who's been practicing it for so long, degree in communications. What do you say? Do you, and because I imagine part of you doesn't want to discourage, but at the same time, you want to like put your feet on the ground. This this is my area.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where I kind of want to talk out of this side and I kind of want to talk out of this side.
Right.
It's, I guess in a way, it's kind of like, okay, then do it. Then you go
Yeah.
do it. Because a lot of times I have people, and like I was saying earlier on, I am working with someone now, a bit of a student. His name's JP. He actually comes to the CCW school. He's been to a couple of shows. That's how I met him, through CCW. And JP has shown enough to me that he really wants it, to where I'm actually going to give him my time and work with him. But I've had several people over the years, oh, I want to do it, I want to get involved, blah, 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 blah. But I think once they start having to put a little bit of work in and realize this is what actually is involved. It's not just, hey, clothesline, arm drag, suplex. It's not just that. So I think once people realize, connecting the dots, hey, I got to get from point A to point B in, a seamless fashion, and calling sure, maybe calling a 5-minute match isn't that difficult, but try calling a 20-minute match. Try a 30-minute match. Do it solo, without gaps, with filling in story, being able to carry that. It's not easy. And I remember, we're approaching the 10-year anniversary next month. To me, for a long time, what I considered to be my pinnacle match, it was a gentleman by the name of Victor Griff, Diamond Victor Griff in Virginia, against Paul London. We obviously all know Paul London, former WWE Tag Team Champion, in a ladder match. And they went 35 minutes, and I was solo. And this was this was 2012. So we're talking me, a couple years into the business. I'm 26 years old. I'm not nearly where I am now. I mean, if you go watch the match, you're going to be like, who's that? Because I sound way different. But it's one of those situations where that to me was a real test. And once I got through that and I said, you know what? There's not much I probably can't do if I can get through that the way I got through it. And at the time, I was dealing with a lot of personal stuff too. Obviously, nothing for this show, but my mind wasn't clear. I was in a situation where I had to basically take on this big load and, hopefully still execute. But a lot of people, they think it's easy because, you can't necessarily do a suplex in your living room on the couch, but you could call a match and, you could think it sounds okay, but, are you teasing the main event later? Are you plugging in the sponsor ad? Are you taking us to break at the right time? There's a lot involved there, and that's on the TV level, forgetting just the indie level. So, there's a lot of variables that people don't consider. And yes, at 36 years old, I'm sure my body feels much better than a wrestler at 36 years old. But, it's still a bit of an undertaking, and it is a grind. And listen, you still have to be in condition. You still have to have your cardio because, again, to be able to go 30, 45, 60 minutes sometimes. I mean, I've done matches like that, and you don't always know what's going to happen. So you have to be ready. You have to pace yourself just like you're in the ring.
So CCW, like we talked about earlier, that the CCW runs like every weekend. There's at least, sometimes there's multiple shows. Yeah, sometimes it's multiple shows on the same day of the weekend. I would like to get your perspective, and it'll be different than perhaps some of the wrestlers that I've asked the same question. Why do you think that CCW is able to run this frequency and like this and put out good shows and be successful and have people keep coming back?
I guess this is where I give the self-shameless plug, as well as to everybody else there in the front office. CCW has put in place a team of guys that can run shows, that can operate businesses on their own. And there's several of them in-house, whether it's Gangrel, whether it's TC Reed, the Florida Man, myself, Neilio Costa, CEO of CCW, Dan Evans. We obviously talked about him. I mean, even someone like Lou Spector logistically can help, get things going on an event. We have a lot of people with experience, a lot of people that can lead, and a lot of people who, frankly, they know what they're doing. So this past Saturday, when Nelio and company are up in Nashville running a bigger event, Dan, Trevor, myself, we're pretty much handling things down here for Breakout. Had an incredible event on Saturday, Breakout Soul Survivor, Breakout 13. There's probably, it was about 90% full, almost a full sellout there. A lot of people in the house, no big names on the show. But again, it was the CCW talent you're used to seeing. We're able to advance some situations there, able to drum up some interest in some upcoming stuff for those guys. And then on Sunday, pretty big undertaking. You're talking about Father's Day weekend on Father's Day in a market we're not normally in, with not a lot of big names on the show. So it's a little bit more of a difficult environment. But again, we figured out how to make it work with that same crew on Sunday evening. And, listen, we would have, of course, loved to pack the black box there up in the Lake Park area in the Kelsey Theater, but it was still a pretty decent house, all things considered. All the dads enjoyed it. Everybody else seemed to have a good time. It was a good night of wrestling. And that, I hate to call anything lesser than the other, but to basically have like a C show and that do better than most other companies' A shows, that shows you where CCW is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Blake, I asked you a question earlier, and this one is going to be similar, but as we kind of go home here, I guess, I want to ask you if to point to a match where people can go out and look on YouTube or whatever, and they get the true Blake Chadwick experience. Like, what match should they be looking up to watch and to really get the best idea of your commentary? If they haven't heard it already, can shame on them not watching the live wrestling.
So, you could go a couple of different avenues there. I think that recent Gangrel Jacob Fatu from St. Lucie Showdown 2, that no disqualification bout back in April, which is recently released on the CCW YouTube channel, I think that's an excellent example there. Also, in this week's episode of Alive, you take a look, go back to May and Bash of the Brew, huge South American Alliance elevated status tag team title ladder match. To me, I don't like putting myself over here, but if you want to hear a story told, that's where you go listen to it. A lot advanced there, a lot happened in terms of the future, dictating the future of CCW. And, you have to understand the moments. A moment like that does not call for body slams and does not call for arm drags. The moment like that calls for, let me tell you what's happening right now, because this is major shakeup here with the company. So I think those are good matches to kind of get an example of, a little bit more of a physical match and then a little bit more of a story match. Even the Bus, Big English back at St. Lucie Showdown 2 getting married. We're telling a story. We're telling a story there. So, those are good examples. I like to think, I'm a sports guy, obviously, so I like to make some analogies there. Ryan, if you're not, my apologies. If our listeners aren't, my apologies. But typically, when you look at baseball, a 300 hitter is a Hall of Famer. I like to think that I'm a 300 hitter. I like to think I'm someone that goes up there each and every night, going to get you a hit. It might not always be some flashy home run, but I'm going to always get on base. I'm going to always produce, and you know what to expect out of me. And I think that consistency is one of the reasons why I'm in the position I'm in now, because you don't really have to guess. I'm going to show up on time. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to give you everything I've got, and I'm going to do it each and every night. So whether it's ring announcing, whether it's commentary, whether it's both in the same night, in the same environment, whatever it might be, I'm ready to step up, because it's about the bigger picture. And a lot of times people don't see that. And, I'm the garnish on the plate. I'm what finishes it off. I'm not your steak, I'm not your potatoes, but I'm that little, garnish that puts that proverbial cherry on top.
Absolutely. Well, Blake, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I think you offer such a different perspective when we look at, CCW and everything. Anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
This has been a lot of fun. I could do this every week, I know, but you got a whole roster to go through. So, certainly, Ryan, you did a great job there. I enjoy watching these each and every Monday on our CCW YouTube channel. It's a great 1-2 punch kicking the week off with this on CCW Insider. And then, of course, Tuesday, following up with a great episode of Alive. So it's certainly a great way. And then, of course, as you mentioned, several live events. So almost get that full week of CCW action here. But as you mentioned, full schedule coming up. Very excited to see what's coming down. Of course, I don't know exactly when this is airing, so I don't know if it's going to be before or after. But, of course, our next big Bash in the Brew event will be July 2nd. Ariel Levy, Cha-Cha Charlie for the CCW Heavyweight Championship. So by the time this airs, we could be talking about a whole new landscape here in Coastal Championship Wrestling. But a lot of exciting stuff coming up here, whether it's in Nashville, whether it's down here in South Florida. And I'm very happy to be a part of it all. And, everybody here with CCW, it's been a pleasure being a part of this family. And I really do feel like a part of the CCW family. And that's a great thing. And listen, as long as they'll have me and as long as I'm able and available, and, it wouldn't be a bad thing if I was going a little higher, but if I'm around and I'm still on the independent level, I want to be home with CCW.
Absolutely. That said, I can't think of a better way to end the episode. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Well, that's our show, and I just have to say that I found this interview to be super fascinating to hear the perspective of Blake Chadwick, the voice of CCW, to hear about his journey. Someone who has loved wrestling basically from birth, and it doesn't really get any more from birth than you have a nanny holding you watching the NWA on television. So great stuff from Blake. He's invited back anytime. In the meantime, though, drop us a comment on who you would like to see on the show. Follow Minutes to Bell Time on Facebook and Twitter, and of course, Coastal Championship Wrestling on Facebook and Twitter as well. And watch a live wrestling every Tuesday at 7 p.m. We'll see you next week with another episode of CCW Insider. You have been watching CCW Insider, produced by Minutes to Bell Time in association with Coastal Championship Wrestling.